We're going to be focusing on the John 15 passage, though I will talk a little bit briefly about the Acts passage at the end. When I was preparing for today's talk earlier in the week, I ended up thinking about relationships, the nature of relationships, what they're like, how we measure them, how we know what is a good relationship, and how we make the decision to get into different types of relationships. Because I think we probably don't think about it very much. We know when a relationship's gone bad because we argue with people or we fight with people, and we know when a relationship is good, we think, although maybe we don't notice it quite as much as when it's bad. So we might have this kind of continuum, good to bad, and then most of our relationships are generally good with the odd bit of tension, maybe somewhere in the middle. But actually, if we were to analyze our relationships a bit more, we would find out that there are different types of relationship in our lives. And I'm not just talking about uncle and aunt and mum, dad, friend, colleague, and all those sorts of things. But actually, the way the relationship works is based on something different to another relationship, for argument's sake. So, hope you can see this image well. I've put up an image here of a lady about to pay for her shopping at the till. And it looks like she's got a fair amount of shopping. Everyone probably has this experience, probably most weeks, although I realise people get home delivery a lot more now as well. And the relationship between this lady and the lady at the till is purely what's called a transactional relationship. They interact with one another simply so that one can receive money and the other can receive their food. There's an exchange that takes place, and the whole relationship, if we can even call it that, is based on a transaction happening. Now, you might be a very friendly person, and you might actually go to the supermarket, Tesco's or Morrison's or wherever, and you kind of struck up a bit of a chatty relationship with someone behind the till. Maybe you even make a beeline for this certain cashier that you quite like, so that you can pick up with them week after week. And that's quite nice. You might exchange some pleasantries and have a bit of a nice time and see how they're doing, they see how you're doing, etc., etc., etc. But at the end of the day, it never goes beyond that, because the relationship is purely based on it being a transaction. You're there to get one thing, and the other person is here to get the other. Do you know, it's funny. People think generally that's how religion works. And to be fair, the faiths, the non-Christian faiths of the world, do kind of work like that. I do something for God, and God does something for me, and it's entirely transactional. Our faith is not like that at all, and this John passage shows us. Our relationship with Jesus is not transactional. We don't give him a bit and he gives us something back. That's not, the image in John 15 is not a story about a person paying for their shopping. It's a story of a vine and a branch and fruit, and that is a completely different thing. A relationship with Jesus, this passage shows us, is one of connection, of real connection. So, a couple of images up there to show that and demonstrate that for you as well. I like that photograph which I found online of a dad and his son or daughter walking, and then there's a group of sort of happy-looking friends just in the bottom right-hand corner, just all huddled together for a photo. Those relationships are completely different to the relationship of cashier and customer. Those relationships involve real connection. They involve real connection. And the relationships we have in our lives which involve a real connection can also can be difficult, or they can be really positive. But the thing about them is that you cannot but help let those relationships influence you and shape you. You can pay for your shopping, and the person behind the counter will have no influence on your life other than for that 5 minutes. But those closest to you, they do have an influence on you. A good relationship will change you for the better, arguably. A difficult, bad relationship will do the opposite. It will drag you into a negative places you don't want to go. And it might be that vice versa as well, the effect of our own personalities in the lives of others. And so when we make friendships, when we make these other deep relationships, we are conscious that if we make that connection with people, it will affect our lives. We could be changed by that relationship. We know that, don't we? Jesus talking about the vine is showing us that we are connected. When we come to faith in Jesus Christ, we are connected to him. Before we were converted, we might have had all sorts of ideas about how people should relate to God, like it's a transaction, I do this, you give me that, etc. But when we come to Jesus Christ and we're accepted by him, we become connected to him. How can that be so when Jesus is risen and in heaven? Well, we're connected to him directly by the power and presence of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is referred to as the Spirit of Christ in at least one verse in the Bible. So Jesus connects to us and indeed dwells within us. He abides in us by the Spirit. So our relationship with God, if we have one, is an organic connection, a real and living connection. But notice this. The connection means that life flows. Now you can see that all from the idea of the vine. So I don't know much about agriculture or anything like that, but I know enough to know that the vine grows, the branches grow off, and then the sap, flows through the vine and into the branches, and that's what gives the branches the power and the energy and the life to grow fruit. So the connection means a flow of life. But this is a one-way flow of life from Jesus to us. That's what Jesus tells us. He is the vine, we are the branches. We do not give Jesus life. We do not influence Jesus. We do not change Jesus. He, once we're connected to him, changes us. So that fusion of relationship means Jesus' heart becomes our heart. And it might seem like a long process, and there might be setbacks along the way, but that's the way we're going if we have the connection. Jesus' heart becomes our heart. Jesus' mind becomes our mind. And you've noticed that at the end, Jesus said, if you remain in me, and my words remain in you. So Jesus' words. So yes, this connection involves our hearts and our personalities and our transformation of those, but it also includes the transformation of our minds as Jesus' words get into our systems and transform how we view the world, how we view ourselves, how we view God, how we view others, how we view reality. This is a one-way transfer of life from Jesus to us. The flow is from the vine to the branches. The branches do not give life to the vine. It's the other way around. Jesus to us, not us to Jesus. And that's important because I don't know if you've ever come across this idea, but there does seem to be that amongst some people, and maybe you've thought this yourself as well, that vibe to think, I wish Jesus was a bit different. I wish he maybe had worded that a bit differently, or he'd said something, he hadn't said that, or he didn't make such demands upon my life. There can be a temptation to want Jesus, to want us to change Jesus rather than Jesus to change us. But this passage makes clear we can't do that. Jesus' life flows to us, not the other way around. But that's a good thing, because Jesus in this passage promises that we will be fruitful. We will be fruitful. His heart becomes our heart, his mind becomes our mind, and the life of him will grow through us. And there's also a warning attached to that. as Jesus says in multiple times. Branches which bear no fruit, they wither, they're thrown away, and they're burned. If there is no fruit, then it shows that we haven't had that connection with Jesus at all, really, and we've just been going through the motions. But the promise is there that if we have put our faith in him, the floodgates are open through our connection with him to have his life come into us. And notice that's the way round. This is not transactional. Jesus says to his disciples, you are already clean by the word I have spoken to you. You don't have to put in lots of effort to kind of climb up and attach yourself to the vine. You are already clean and accepted through faith in me and my words. That's the starting point. And so the starting point is forgiveness and acceptance. And then from that point on, there is the whole life of Christ through the power of the Holy Spirit available to flow into us as it flows from a vine into a branch. And what will happen? There will be fruit. It's good news. It's a beautiful picture, and it's an encouragement to us. But it's also a challenge. Because I don't know about you, but so often I find myself falling into a transactional way of thinking about my relationship with God. So often. Even last night preparing this talk. Oh, if I give the Lord an hour, maybe he'll come through for me. That's transactional. That's not connection. That's not growth. That's not relationship. That's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And I pine for more of seeing the fruit of Jesus, the fruit of the Spirit in my life. And thinking less about, I've got this list of 5 things that I could give to God, and maybe he'll give me some stuff back, but thinking more about what is fueling my devotional life, what is fueling my Christian life. The desire to connect with Jesus and have his life flow into me and to see the beauty of that. You know, I told the story probably about 3 years ago, so you've probably forgotten it, so it's probably long enough for me to mention it again, about I was at home in my study and I was praying. This was in the middle of a weekday. It wasn't like anything fancy. It was just me praying in the middle of a weekday. I really felt the Lord meet with me quite powerfully. I actually ended up lying on the floor at one point, but there's a real sense of the presence of God there. Not long after that, the phone went, and it was one of these kind of telesales type things with someone claiming to be from somewhere or other. Now, in my normal day-to-day mood, I just pick it up, and if there's no one there, I put it down, or I just might say I'm not interested, or thank you very much for your call, but I'm not interested, and hang up. On this occasion, and I think it was to do with the fact I just spent that time with the Lord, I decided to get chatty with the bloke on the end of the phone. And in fact, I can't remember how I did it, but I brought up my faith, and I mentioned to him about being a Christian and stuff, completely, I'm not sure how. And then, amazingly, this guy said, "Oh, do you know this Bible verse?" And then he quoted some Bible verse from Jeremiah. And I said, "I do know that verse." And then he knew some other verses as well. And we ended up having a proper conversation about the Bible, these Bible verses and the meanings of them, and how this guy said to me he'd been really looking into the different faiths of the world, and he'd been reading the Bible and been looking at the Bible. And I said, "Oh, that's great." And we carried on chatting. And it turned out he lived in Blackpool. So I started going on my phone online because he was interested in finding a church in Blackpool. So I went on phone online this is my mobile, I was on the landline, and found him a church that looked like it fitted the part in Blackpool. And I said, "Well, how about this one? Why don't you check that one out?" And he said, I think he said, "Yes, I think that would be good. Thank you very much." And that was the end of the phone call. Now that is not my everyday experience, nor is it anything that I could have planned. It's nothing I could have planned. And yet that's probably one of the most significant conversations about faith that I've had probably in recent years. With someone I don't know. Not with you guys, but with people that I don't know. And I'm convinced that that time I had with the Lord set me up for that conversation. And I wonder if it's the same, think of it the same as with Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. We look at that passage in Acts and we think, again, it's completely outside of our power. We can't do this. It all seemed to hinge on Philip's relationship with Jesus, doesn't it? He has the relationship, and therefore God uses him. He has the relationship, and therefore fruit comes out of it. How does it begin? It begins with an angel telling him to go down to a road. So he does. The next bit of information, the Spirit tells him to go to the chariot that goes past on the road. Happens to be some important Ethiopian government official, the treasurer of the Ethiopian kingdom, who happens to be reading Isaiah, having been worshipping in Jerusalem. So he gets on board. He shares the gospel, taking as his starting point the bit of Isaiah that the eunuch was reading. The eunuch comes to faith. He baptizes him at a puddle that they just happen to pass. And by the way, there's not loads of water in Gaza, so this is not like, they're not going alongside the river the whole way, I don't imagine. And then that Ethiopian goes off celebrating, presumably returns home. The Ethiopian church is one of the oldest churches in the world. It's ancient. The gospel came to Ethiopia a long time before, at least a significant amount of time before it came to Britain. I don't know the history of it, but it seems to me that that Ethiopian eunuch was used by God in bringing the gospel to Ethiopia and God building a church there. Philip couldn't have planned any of that. But it seems to me his relationship with Jesus meant he was connected and ready, and therefore God used him to bring about fruit. That's the challenge for us today. Let's renew two things. Let's remember that if we have put our faith in Jesus Christ, if we have said yes to him, then we are clean through the Word, and we are born again of the Spirit. And the connection is there already. But when we come to pray, when we come to shape our life, when we come to spend time with the Lord, when we think about our walk of faith with Jesus Christ, are we thinking about connecting with him, or are we thinking about simply making transactions with him? I'm challenged by this because I fall into transactions too often, whereas I should be ready to be a branch attached to a vine, ready to bear much fruit.